brighten you up a little bit.
Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Christie Hamner. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I've always known that Parents Helping Parents was out there, but this whole thing with the online stuff and everything is really exciting to me because I am in a rural area. So a lot of times the clients that I work with and people that I see, they would like to come in and get support, and resources are limited in our area. So this is really great. And I've actually referred some people online to check it out and get some support. So I appreciate you having me here. I guess I'll just share a little bit about myself before we get started. Um, First of all, I'm a recovering person, a family member. Um, I am from a small town in Olive. You probably don't even know where that's at, in the middle of nowhere. Um, and both of my parents are alcoholics, still active in their drinking. So I grew up in that, and I realized later in recovery that there was a lot of things that I did that identified now with the adult children of alcoholics. So I work that side of the program. And it's just brought me a lot of relief. So actually, the thing that brought me to counseling was in school. I always would research topics, intergenerational patterns of addiction and things like that, because it always intrigued me. Um, and so every time I would write a paper, it would lead me back to Al-Anon and recovery for the family members. And I realized that I needed help myself. So, and that's kind of what led me. I go to Al-Anon, which is 12-step recovery. There's lots of recovery groups out there. So 12-step works for me. And through that whole process, I really started gaining some peace and relief. And I wanted to get in that line of work. And that's kind of what led me to counseling. So my experience, I worked at Valley Hope for 11 years. Did just about everything there. I started out in the business office and then went through the training program in 2007. And that's a year-long ordeal. And then just worked as a counselor there, and I worked with all kinds of addicts and alcoholics. I loved it. Um, but I also did a lot of the family program, and I worked during the weekends, and we would do lectures, and the family would come in and sit with the patients. And it really was a it was just a profound experience all the way around. Now I'm in private practice, so I get to do it in kind of a different avenue. Um, and I still work with addicts and alcoholics and family members of, and it's probably, I would say, a different pace. But so I've kind of seen all the different sides, from the time of admission to outpatient to recovery and working things like that. So I don't know if that's what I'm supposed to share, like about myself, or.
Yeah, you can talk about whatever you want.
Okay. um, so tonight, I was trying to think about how I would present to you guys some information, and what I thought we would talk about is the family addiction of the disease of family addiction. A lot of times, like when I worked at Valley, we would get the patient in there, and by the time that we got the patient to treatment, the family was kind of like, oh, finally, they could get some rest and know where their loved one was. And I think a lot of times the assumption is that we would get them there and 30 days and they'd be fixed and it would be done. And sometimes they were so mad that they didn't want to come to the family group. Other times they would come with hesitation. But the family group and program that we had was really geared towards the family members. And that could be, a parent, it could be, they could be a relative of any kind, friend, family member. It could be a spouse. And so by the time that they would come, from day 1 until day 3, because it's a 3-day ordeal, they would gain a lot of insight into their own stuff. And really, a lot of times, the family members, it's the first encounter of people asking them, how are you doing with this? Because they focused on the disease of addiction and what's been happening in their life for so long that they don't even realize that they have put their own needs, their own self aside just to focus on making this person better or what they thought would be better. So I guess in parallel to what I learned, um, there's stages of things that start to happen, and they're very parallel with the addiction. So, for instance, when you first start noticing there's a problem in the family, um, things start to happen that might change the dynamic in the family, where they start using and or you don't even know they're using, but things are happening, like they're MIA, or they start missing work, or they're not going to school, or you're noticing mood changes and things like that. And that's when the family comes in and says, I don't really know what's happening. And so they start to try and focus on that. And then during that course, they kind of, my thoughts are like all over the place. I'm trying to during that progression, what happens is they start to kind of adopt the same behaviors, even thoughts and feelings that what the addict might have. Some anger starts to happen, guilt, like what am I doing that's causing this person to go out and use, to ignore their responsibilities. And then it starts to become a cycle of, okay, I need to check on them. I need to make sure they're awake to go to work. I need to make sure their bills are paid and things like that. So the progression starts, and then sooner or later it comes out that they're using or they're drinking and the lying. I have a little thing here that I really love. It's Claudia Black. She's like an icon in the family disease part. And I use a lot of these worksheets in here with my clients. But she has a lot of the symptoms that you can identify with. I'll name off a few, and maybe you guys can identify with these. But attempts of trying to control the person when you feel like your life is out of control, is, canceling plans with your friends, starting to become consumed with what's happening around you, and what they're doing, assuming their responsibilities, paying their bills. I'm actually minimizing it to other people, other family members, even starting to miss work, getting sick, avoiding people, and then, even lecturing the person and saying, what's wrong? Why can't you grow up? Why can't you do what you're supposed to do? And the whole time, the addict's usually getting the means to do this from somewhere. If they're not providing it themselves, it can go into enabling them, giving them money, and then, even the addict active in their addiction can start stealing and things like that. And so it creates a really hostile environment in the home. So, and it's hard because if you don't have the education or the resources to understand how to deal with that, because as a parent, I know that we want to protect our child from any, unsafe things or anything that could hurt them. But at the same time, that's contributing to the addiction. So there's 3 C's in Al-Anon. It's you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it, but you can contribute to it. And so that's where, when they get to treatment, it's really important, or even before. A lot of times the family will draw some boundaries beforehand, and that really causes the addict to kind of have to face their own consequences, which in turn will cause some pain and discomfort for them. That is actually a good thing because they can remember that misery when they're in the recovery. I always say, remember the misery, remember the pain, because it's going to serve you in your recovery. It's going to be something that you have to go back to, you have to think about. And I truly believe that in everyone's recovery, there's a moment. There's just like a moment of, I call it surrender, but a clarity, or it can be that point where you change. Mine was actually, grew up in a home where both parents drank, and my dad was a preacher. And my parents divorced after 30 years of marriage. So my mom was the codependent person in the relationship, but towards the end, after I moved out, she started drinking as well. So a lot of times, the codependent person will turn to substances as well to deal with what they're going through. And it's not just alcohol or drugs. It can be gambling. It can be, shopping. It can be relationships. It could be lots of different things. So that was my parents. And then what I did is I went into a relationship, had a marriage where he was an alcoholic. Oh, well, he still is an alcoholic. He's still active in his addiction. And we divorced. And then I went into another relationship where he, for 10 years, and he drank and got DUIs, and I was assuming all the responsibilities, but I could see the things that were happening with him, the anger, the denial, the rage, all those things were actually happening with me as well. And then he would feel guilty and then drink. And then I would feel guilty and try to control. And so my moment was the point where I knew something needed to change. And I was actually in Al-Anon at that time, but I didn't have the willpower to do it. So I asked my higher power to do what I couldn't do for myself. And the next day, just things fell into place. And my friends were like, well, we'll meet you with the trucks and move you. And my friend was like, I got a room in my apartment, come live with me. And I was like, no, I don't want to do this, but I did it anyway. And so that was the best thing that happened for me, because I knew that it needed to happen, but there was actually a withdrawal period as well with that in a relationship. And I think that goes for pretty much any relationships. Like if you've been obsessed about someone else and they're using and what they're doing and thinking about it all the time, Claudia Black talks about a trance-like state when you're the codependent person. So that would mean you just go through the motions during the day and you're not even feeling the things that's happening. You're just kind of numb, and you could run stoplights. That's happened with me. You can have, like, they don't call it really blackouts because you're not using, but just things that happen. I mean, there was a 10-year period in my life that I really can't remember, and it was just, I was going through the motions. So there's a lot of similar symptoms that happen with the using, and then the relationships that go along with that. So that 2 years of time after that breakup was when I started just really focusing on myself, and it was painful. And a lot of times I describe it to the family members as, your foot's been asleep for a long time. And when you start unraveling those thoughts and feelings, the anger, the guilt, whatever you may be feeling underneath, that it is a painful process, but it's really important to embrace that, because you're that much closer to coming out to the other side and getting the benefit of recovery, which there's no comparison to how that feels on the other side. So that's kind of the progression of the disease. I'm trying, my mind is blanking, but I guess the thing that has saved me the most is, well, number one, my spirituality and the program, but the people that you surround yourself with. Um, we have so many support groups out there now. It's more so now than when I first started in the field, and so that is really wonderful. So there's a lot of resources, and most, a lot of the support groups and the 12-step meetings are free, Celebrate Recovery and things like that. But you've got to surround yourself with people that are helpful, that can really be honest with you, but love you at the same time. And that's where you start focusing on yourself and going, okay, what kind of negative energy do I have around me, and where do I need to draw boundaries? And I do think there's a grief process that goes along with that too, when you set boundaries, because, in the beginning, they say detach with love. I couldn't do that, so I detached with anger. But learning how to do that and not be resentful is really, it's an art. And it takes a while. If you've had a lot of offenses or things that have happened to you that the addict has done, or someone that you're in a relationship has done, it takes a lot to get to that point where you can have some grace and forgiveness, but also forgiving yourself. That is one of the biggest things that helped me to learn how to be tolerant and patient of others, is accepting myself. And so there's some behaviors that go along with, if you've grown up in a home with alcoholism and addiction. um, Perfectionism was mine. There's different roles that children can take on. I had a brother, or I have a brother, and his was the mascot. He actually would try and make everyone laugh to take the tension off of the home. And I was the one, even from a small child, that wanted to make sure everyone else was okay. That's where the people pleasing comes in, and that's where saying yes to people when you want to say no. Um, Achievements, and that is still a big issue for me today. It's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And realizing that's not success. Defining success and realizing that your peace is the most important. And I'm pretty stingy with my peace at this point. I don't give it to just anybody. And so saying no. I was going to go over how to set a boundary. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
you got it.
Okay. I know that when I first started in my own recovery, people were like, boundaries, boundaries. And I knew kind of what that meant, but I don't think I really knew what all that entailed. And I thought it was just trying to control somebody else and get them to do what I wanted them to do. And I felt like that was something that I'd already tried and it didn't work. And a boundary is quite something different. A boundary is actually an act of self-care. So that is something that to me is life or death for my own emotional wellness. So setting boundaries is hard, I think, in the beginning, because it's typically, if addiction's been in the family for a while, addicts and alcoholics don't like boundaries, and you're going to get some rebuttal when it comes to that, and you're going to get a lot of anger probably, and things like that. And so I think that's a lot of times why we don't set them, because people are afraid of the reaction that they're going to get. And what I tell my clients is, get ready for whatever response you're going to have, because you need to do it anyway. Feel the guilt. We can talk about it in here. You can talk about it with your sponsor. You can talk about it, but do it anyway. So just realize that it's an act of self-care, and it's not to punish a person. And in the end, like when I worked at Valley Hope, it was really amazing when the patients would get up there and tell their story, and they would have like 7 to 12 minutes to kind of share what brought them there and what consequences they've had and how they felt about being there. And notoriously, they would start talking about how their families had left them in jail, or how they weren't there anymore. They weren't going to give them money anymore. And they might have initially been mad in the beginning, but you would hear them over and over thank their parents or thank their loved ones for doing that, because they would have never got to the point that they were at unless a boundary was set. So that's how important boundaries are. And it's really important after they get into recovery as well to continue with that. So when you're setting a boundary, it's important just to be specific. Timing is everything. So if someone is, intoxicated or high, that's really probably not the time to set the boundary, because they might not remember, and they're not going to like it. So it might be kind of challenging in the beginning, but picking a time to set it, being reasonable about it, kind of talk to some people and say, is this a good boundary for me to set? But the important part about boundaries is making it enforceable. So to me, a boundary can't be enforced unless you have a consequence related to it. So like if you set a boundary, this is kind of a format I use, when you continue to come in my house drunk or high, for example, I feel disrespected or anxious or afraid. And what I need from you is to not come into my home if you're using. I know that's pretty general, but then what you do is you back it up with a consequence. So if you continue to do this, this is what I will do. And so then you figure out what consequence is enforceable. So if you're not going to enforce it, don't say it, because then it's just another empty threat, which we get really good at in our codependency. So it's really about enforcing that boundary, and saying, I will, tell you to leave. If you don't leave, I will call the police. So it can be simple. But this is setting an expectation, and this is actually something for them to know what's going to happen. And your loved one, the addict or alcoholic in your life will know if you're serious or not. They know, because they know all of the weaknesses, and the addiction plays on that. The addiction wants to kind of hit your soft spot. So if they know it makes you feel guilty, they're going to go, whatever can make you do what they want you to do, they're going to try it. So I would just keep it short and sweet. Don't explain or justify. You don't have to do that. And just know that no is really a complete sentence. You can say no, and you don't have to engage anymore at that point, and just say that's what's going to happen. And then when it comes along, you do it. I didn't set a boundary for myself until I think I was in my 30s with my mom. There were some things that she was doing that was causing me a lot of anxiety. I didn't even realize what it was. From a young child, my mom would tell me a lot of things that I didn't need to know. I was just a little bitty adult running around with all this adult information. And so when I got older and I started working a program, I was like, I know why I'm getting anxious, because she's talking about, my dad when I'm around her, and I don't want that to happen. I was so scared when I did that. I was 30 years old, but I felt like I was 10 trying to set a boundary. But I made it in a public place because I knew that she wouldn't react, like she would at home. And I just said, I want you to hear me out. I just need a few minutes of your time. And I said it. I said, when you talk about my dad, I feel anxious, and I need for you to stop doing that. And if you continue to do that, I will change the subject, or hang up the phone or walk away. And there was a little truce time during that time. She didn't like that. So there was about 2 months we didn't talk, and it was all I could do not to call her and make everything okay, and because it was tense. And that's what we do when we set a boundary. We set it, and it feels uncomfortable, and we want to take it back. But as you get stronger in your recovery, it's a lot easier to say no, because you know that it's going to save you a lot of grief and heartache down the road. So So that's part of me preserving my peace, and really just taking care of myself. So boundaries are important. I don't know, are there any questions or anything?
There have not been any questions yet.
Okay. My mind is just blank at this point.
If anybody has questions, be sure to fire those off in the comments section. We would love to answer those for you.
I know that when the family would come to treatment, they would come thinking, oh, I'm here for them, you know, and by the time they left, it would be really evident that they were getting some relief. But a lot of times what I would do when the patient would come is if they were really serious about, you know, cutting off the enabling and the things that were happening that contributed to their addiction, I would have them make out a plan with their parents or their loved one that said, these are the signs that would be headed towards a relapse. These are the things that would happen if I were to relapse. And then I would have them write down the things that their parents or their family did that contributed to the addiction. So that's really when you know that they're getting serious about their recovery, when they're going to blow the whistle on themselves and say, these are the things that I did in my, that you did in the addiction that actually contributed to me continuing to use. Doesn't mean that you have power over them using, but it means that, you know, if you were giving them money or not allowing them to have their consequences, that is essentially just contributing to the addiction. And so that's a big thing to do when you sit down in family therapy, is really say, okay, tell your parents or your family members what they have done that you know is not good or healthy in recovery. And some of them would be really shocked at the things that they were like, oh, I thought I was helping, you know. A lot of times I get the question about, you know, should I kick them out of the home if they're, you know, if they're using, I don't want them to be homeless. And that one's always the hardest one, I think, for families. And I never say you should do this or you should do that, because it really is your call. However, I would take in as much information as you can and ask yourself if that is something that is contributing to their recovery or their addiction. And then really be honest with yourself about, okay, if they had to be out on the street, is that a consequence that would be with their addiction? And I can tell you that, you know, if they're in jail or on the street, every day that they're out there means, in my mind, it's one step closer to them deciding that they don't want to do that anymore. That's not always the case, but a lot of the times they will say, okay, I'm done. What do I need to do? And treatment starts to become more appealing at that point, you know. So so if someone, my family members know that if anyone's in jail, I will not be bailing them out, period. The two things that I did learn, especially in college and, well, my training too, is that the biggest protective factors against addiction, you know, in your family, the patterns repeating themselves, is with children, it's supervision. That's a big deal. But the second one was education about recovery and about the addiction. In my family, we didn't really talk about stuff like that. We were expected to go to church. I grew up in a very, we went to church a lot. My dad preached, but his drinking progressed. And so it was very confusing. But we didn't talk about, it was just, you don't do it. You know, you don't do it. but then it was contradicting because as I got older, I knew it was happening. So you don't do this, but I can do this. And then, we're going to go to church on Sunday, pretend everything's okay. So, talking openly about things in your family. My daughter, she has known from a small child the risks in our family. That I've had a cousin overdose and die at 18. I've had two uncles die of, one was a motorcycle accident and he was high, and another one was cirrhosis. Um, and my grandmother was in Al-Anon, um, but my grandfather was an alcoholic and a compulsive gambler. He died at a very young age. And then now I'm finding out, even now, that there's a long history on my dad's side of addiction, but it was never talked about. Because if you're from the old school, I think a lot of times you know, it was, don't talk about it. These are things that happen in our home. They stay in our home and we just are not open. And so children, it just goes along in generations where you just don't educate about the dangers of it and what it can do. And I think, we've come such a long way in people going to the schools and, even in churches now. The church I grew up in, we just didn't, it was like it wasn't happening when it was. But, now there's Celebrate Recovery and there's all kinds of avenues to talk about the addiction. But my daughter, she went to work with me at Valley Hope and did the psychological testing there, and she got to see firsthand just how devastating and baffling and powerful it is. And it really just left an impression on her, and I'm really thankful for that. And she's had some friends that have gone through it, and she knows the risk is there, and she's had her time battling that as well. And so it's just learning how to be open and honest with the people in your family, and the things they may be facing at school. There was a lot of adults that came through that, they said, I had a great childhood. There was no drinking or anything. And then I went to college and I started drinking, and then I just didn't stop, so it started out where it wasn't anything in their family, but the risk is still there. So it can be psychological. It can be, the nature versus nurture thing, but the risk is higher if addiction's in your family, but there's still a risk even if it's not in your family. So this addiction does not care. It's no respecter of persons. It doesn't care how much money you have, what kind of religion you have, or how much, if it's in your family, if it's not in your family, the risk is there. So I feel like I'm all over the place.
You're good. Take just a moment or two, Christie, and tell everybody what Graves Community Counseling does, how to get in touch with you if they're interested in services, kind of what the coverage areas is. And that should give everybody an opportunity to get their questions in.
Okay.
So that if there's questions right after you're done, you can take those.
Okay. I work at Graves Community Counseling. I've been there about 3 years. We are an agency in that rural area. We have a licensed clinical social worker. I'm an LPC, LADC, MH, and then Nicole is an LPC, LADC as well. And then we have a couple interns, and we just hired another male counselor. So we're growing, and we serve the community lots of different ways. I primarily take a lot of addiction stuff and family members, couples. I do treat children as well. But, we all kind of have our little niche, but we serve the children. We have school-based services. We have online telehealth services. I'm open to doing groups. I haven't done that yet. Sometimes that's hard to get started in the rural area because I do some telehealth sessions, and so it can be a challenge, but I'm open to doing that. Recently, I just did a workshop for couples. I have taken the level, I'm at level 2 on the Gottman training. So, and I went to Seattle and took a workshop on how to present the 7 principles. And so we did that, and that was fun. And I'll have another one in February. So that's kind of something new we're starting. And we just have, we take Medicaid and Sooner Care, and of course our LCSW can take Medicare, and then we're paneled with a lot of different insurances as well. So we like serving our community there, and there's definitely a need for sure. So
question, what are your thoughts on a contract with a person in recovery as far as behaviors, responsibilities expected of them if they're going to be living at home?
Obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but I definitely think it's a good guide for expectations. I always have the families do a, I call it a plan your relapse worksheet that they do. And then the commitments too, like if they return home with their family, things that they commit to doing. But I always tell the family members, if you're going to do something like that, like a contract, you need to put in there the consequences if they don't follow that. So that's real important, because a lot of times, they'll say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do 90 meetings in 90 days, and I'm going to get a sponsor, and I'm going to stay clean. I'll even take a urine drug test, and then they just don't do it. And then there's nothing that's done. So that to me is sending a message that, no action will be taken. So it has to be like something that can be enforced if they don't follow that contract. So I have a lot of hesitancy at this point because there's so many resources for, now I don't know what age, but 18 and over, they can go to a sober living house, which I think is a better sense of accountability towards other men or women that are working the program, because it takes the pressure off the parents to try and make them accountable or make sure they're sober, because they still, the parents are going to still be going through a recovery process as well. So it's going to be second nature if you're new to recovery to want to go in there and make sure they're okay and go through their things or whatever your behaviors were in the addiction. So it kind of takes the pressure off if you can have, people in a sober living home and be accountable to them, because there's regulations there. So, and, sometimes if they don't want to do that, I'll say, okay, we'll try this and revisit it in 90 days. And if it's not working, then you need to go to a sober living home. So.
Good question. All right, now's the time. If you've got any other questions, fire them out. We're going to give you just a second to get those typed in while we share a moment of awkward silence. Which is always how it goes.
Awkward silence. I was trained at Valley Hope to be comfortable with silence.
Absolutely. I once sat in a session with a 15-year-old for 45 minutes.
Oh, been there, done that.
We just looked at each other. All right. No questions. Oh.
A question?
No, I just clicked the wrong button, guys. Sorry, I killed the video there for a second. That was exciting. All right, thank you guys for joining us. Be sure that you are right back here in 2 weeks on the 16th. You definitely don't want to miss this one. We've got a mother coming in just to share her personal story of her recovery and her daughter's recovery. So got some unique perspectives going on there. You don't want to miss that. 2 weeks on the 16th from tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, have a wonderful evening.